Okay.
So I think everybody's here. We have some attendees sort of filtering in, but we'll do our introductions and let's have this conversation today. I am Rachel Olnick. I'm the lecture chair for the Chicago Women in Architecture. Thank you all for spending your evening with us tonight to talk about Chicago advocacy. At Commissioner Arfa's suggestion, I'm also going to do a visual description of myself to make this as accessible as possible. So I am a woman with short curly brown hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing rimless glasses, a black blazer, and I'm in my home office, and behind me you can see my drafting table. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. So we have Commissioner Rachel Arfa and Alderwoman Rossana Rodriguez. So I don't want to read your CV because everybody, I think we know who you are. We have you, and I want you to introduce yourselves and what you would highlight. So Commissioner Arfa, could you start us off, please?
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's so nice to be here with you and other women in architecture. So I'm happy to be a part of this. So my name is Commissioner Rachel Arfa. I'm going to describe myself now. So I have brown hair, and his eyes, and my hair is shorter than in a wearing a silver necklace with beads and a royal blue top with black and white flowers. And I'm coming from my home office. So you see the bookshelves behind me. And I think this is such an important conversation to have about architecture, about our physical space. But a physical space also interacts with how we communicate, and it can also amplify that. And as a deaf person, I think a lot about that and how we interact. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Lovely, thank you. Alderwoman Rodriguez, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rossana Rodriguez Sanchez. I am the Alderwoman of the 33rd Ward. I am a brown woman with curly, medium length hair. You can see a lot of the space that I'm in right now. I'm very happy to be here today. If I was going to talk about who I am, I have been in office for about 1 year and 4 months at this point. I was elected as a grassroots candidate before this elected life. I have been an educator for a very long time and a theater artist. I worked for the Albany Park Theater Project for 7 years, where I was a theater director and ethnographer and youth guidance counselor and mentor. I have taught at every level from pre-K to college, mostly theater. I've been doing a lot of community theater, and through community theater, I ended up engaging in a lot of activism, which ended up getting me to campaign to become the alderman of the 33rd Ward. I am the first brown woman in this seat with a very big commitment to transformation.
Thank you so much.
And I am originally from Puerto Rico.
Yes, yeah, let's not forget. Okay, so thank you both. So let's get down to it. Alderwoman and Commissioner, you're both pretty new to your offices with the City of Chicago. So can you each tell us about your advocacy experience before your current position? And how that experience led you to this role with the city government. And whoever wants to start.
I'm happy to go ahead, but I'm also looking forward to your story, Alderman. So I've been in this job for 10 weeks now. So I started at the beginning of July. And I was appointed by Mayor Lightfoot and I am the Board Commissioner for the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. MOPD was formed 30 years ago, shortly after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the age of the is about the same. And I'm the first commissioner who is deaf. The previous 3 commissioners use wheelchairs. And there's also been amazing to see them to be one of the first as a deaf person, because I communicate openly and I need to have communication access. So that means that when I am now in these meetings, I am able to advocate for spaces, but for different issues, but I also need to make sure that my communication access is in place, that that's always a constant. So like, for example, today we see a sign language interpreter, so Kate here is our screen as a sign language interpreter, so anyone who need sign language interpreter can equally participate. But that's just one example of how I have to modify every space that I go into. And so that life experience guided me, because I am a Chicago native, I born and raised here, and in my experience growing up, Chicago was not always accessible to me. In many organizations and institutions, many assumptions about my abilities as a deaf person that were in many low expectations were by not providing that communication access, communicating that this space was not for me, or that I was not welcome. And so I had to learn how to advocate for myself and advocate so that I could have equal participation. And that's something that is been a driving factor for me, is how not only making sure that I could have that equal access, but also making sure that anyone with a disability can also access that space, whether in physical access or communication access or any other type of accessibility needed. So before I started the job, I spent the previous 9 years as an attorney, and it's no surprise that I became an attorney, because after I learned how to advocate for myself, I decided that I wanted to be able to advocate for other people. So I went to law school, and I first worked as a legal aid attorney in Milwaukee, working on consumer protection and housing cases, trying to stop my clients from becoming homeless. And then I moved back here to Chicago, and I worked in equality, which is protection and advocacy agency that is responsible for protecting the civil and human rights of people with disabilities. So that's the background that I come into, because I've been advocating for people with disabilities to have equal access to employment and to out of our organization institution. So I also worked as civil rights violation. And so I come into this role with the background of being an attorney, advocating for people with disabilities to have the same access. And so now I'm able to use those skills and also my experience in working collaboratively with the cultural access community. So I worked with museums, theaters, and outdoor spaces to make sure that anyone with a disability can access those spaces and also enjoy ours. I think that ours are one of the most amazing treasures of Chicago, and I look forward to the day that we can have as many people enjoy them again as possible. So I think of those lessons in working with the arts to this role, and I will continue to work at that. So out of those experiences inform the dance, then I bring to this role.
Excellent, thank you. So Alderwoman, can you tell us a little bit about your path to this position?
Absolutely. Well, I started advocating very early in life. I am from Puerto Rico. When I was 6 years old, we didn't have running water in my community. I'm from a mountain in the east coast of Puerto Rico. And my first protest and advocacy work was to try to bring back water to our community, because the river that carried the water that was supposed to serve us was redirected to a U.S. Navy base in a nearby town. So the advocacy started really early, and the advocacy started because we did not have access to the resources that were meant for us to be able to have dignified lives. So after that, living in a colony such as Puerto Rico, you always had to fight for resources, for public education, for anything was a fight, right? Fast forward to living in Chicago. When I came here, I was already very politically engaged. And I had already participated in a lot of fights in Puerto Rico around privatization, like preventing privatization of public services. As a labor person, I was in a union in Puerto Rico. I was a teacher. When I came to Chicago, I got very involved in the immigrant rights movement. So when it was time to run for office, both housing justice, tenant rights, and immigration were central to the platform that we ran on. I have been doing a lot of immigration court defense, where we organize people in our community and accompany our neighbors to their immigration courts. We did a lot of eviction defense as well during the housing crisis, when people were losing their homes. And we have done a lot of work to defend the immigrants in our community, from legal aid to fundraising when people are getting deported. So the immigrant rights advocacy and tenant rights and housing rights have been central to our platform. And now that we are in office, we have continued doing that work. So it has become an extension of the past fights.
Excellent, excellent. And do you find that you have many colleagues in both of your roles that are supportive? I know that you've had a number of like co-sponsored ordinances and things with Alderman Carlos Ramirez. Do you find that there's a lot of support or a lot of resistance from the people that you work with, or a bit of both?
I would say both. I am very lucky that I entered city council alongside a cohort of very progressive new aldermen. We're all rookies and we have lots of ideas, and each of us came in with a platform that was very progressive. So yes, I partnered up with Carlos Ramirez Rosa a lot, but I also partnered up with Matt Martin, with Maria Haddon, with Byron Seixo Lopez, with Daniela Espada. Those people are all, and Janet Taylor, they are all, sorry, my child is here. So give me 1 second. Papi, I'm really busy. Okay, gracias. Okay, but I need you to go. I need you to go to the kitchen now. Okay, gracias, mi amor. Okay, bye. Thank you. Okay, bye. So sorry.
Okay.
Yes, so I have I would say that we are a small percent of city council, but there are multiple voices that are speaking at the same time around the same issues. So that gives us strength.
Excellent. And so Commissioner Arfa, can you tell us a little bit about some of the colleagues that you've worked with, or other departments with the city that you've worked with, that have been resistant or have been very supportive? And there seems to be a lot of overlap, I think, with what you and the Alderwoman are doing, at least in terms of housing, in terms of the rights of the people who are often ignored or shut out of discussion. So tell us a little bit more about what your day-to-day work in the city, and I realize that it's only been since July, and it's been in a very strange sort of way. Tell us a little bit more about what you do as part of your advocacy now in this role.
So one of the things that I'm doing is getting to meet people in other departments. because I can't do this work alone. And in fact, that's how you always want to bring people with you, so the more that you could build allies and find that common ground, the more successful you will be. So, and I'm also fortunate because I'm not starting from scratch. My predecessor and others behind her have built a foundation, so I'm able to come in at that foundation. And each commissioner that comes in has their own vision, and each of them works very differently. And I'm being fortunate to get to serve here, Lightfoot, because she's been very supportive. I'm not sure if you know, but she built hurricanes herself. So she's already been embrace that disability, really supported disability advocacy. So I'm able to build a lot of that work. But for me, this time has been about getting to meet the others, find out what's happening at their department. And so I think, for example, I went to the Chicago Public Library, and I went on a tour of the Hill Washington Library. And they have an entire accessibility outreach that they have with different assistive technology. So I liked it so much, then actually I set up tours for my staff to go out the Hill Washington Library and see what they are doing too, because I think it's important not only to look and evaluate what are we doing and how our services are effective and opportunities to grow, but also to learn and see other people. And right now with this virtual world, actually we can have proximity through these virtual means, but there's also ability to seize any opportunities and actual physical proximity. So that's what we were able to do that through social distance measures, your small groups, people that wear masks, they stay 6 feet apart. But I think it's really important to see what other people are doing too, and then so I have players in motion for all of that. So right now at this stage, I'm looking at what other people are doing and how that will overlap with what I wanted to move this department forward in advance at the work that's been done previously.
Excellent. So what are some of the, as you explore what is currently happening at these other departments, what are some of the goals or parts of your particular vision that you're hoping to see during your tenure in this role? Is there like perhaps a focus on, for you, Rachel, right now, a focus on communication? We started talking about that before the Zoom began. Is that one of the main aspects that you're hoping to establish as part of your contribution in this office? What other things are you hoping to do? Or is this still in the, let's see what other folks are doing and where the lack is, exploratory portion? How would you answer that?
So first, I just wanted to take this question to sort of address the perception of disability. I think that there is an assumption that disability is about what people can see. If people think they can see it, that means a person has a disability. But in fact, there are many invisible disabilities out there. You may not know that I'm deaf until maybe you hear me talk, or until I self-identify. The same with someone who's blind or low vision, who has autism, or depression, or any other who's bipolar. There we have a lot of invisible disability, but also there's a temptation to rely on your own perception and assumptions of what disability means. But in fact, but as we are learning during these times, those assumptions can steer us abstract, because disability is both visible and invisible. You may be born within the guidelines, or you may develop disability later, or you may acquire it later in life, or maybe you become disabled as a result of community violence or gun violence. So there are so many different ways that you can become disabled. And under the Americans with Disabilities Act, protection, the civil rights protection are very broad. So the definition of disabilities then includes any kind of impairment that can impact the ability to see, hear, communicate, breathe, understand, move is much more. So yes, disability is about a physical disability that may require you to use a wheelchair or a walker, but then also require, it may also be for someone who's blind or someone who's deaf, needing that communication access to access physical space. And another point about disabilities, then disabilities the only group that anyone can become a member of at any time. A disability exists in every one of our 77 Chicago neighborhoods, in every age range, in every background. So one thing then I think is important is to do ongoing work of raising education awareness about disability. So I working on that education and awareness, studying with my department, because I really want to make sure that my department has that, and then experience that when I also am applying visual equity leaders in the past years been the narrative about people with disabilities is been about white people with disabilities. After time PBC's disability portrayed in the media is seen as a single identity, maybe a white woman sitting in a wheelchair. But it's not very, it doesn't happen very often. They don't see, for example, a black woman with a disability, and all of those other identities can impact the way that there's any interaction, including in a variety of settings. So I want to make sure that our work includes that racial equity, looking at systemic racism, but also making sure that every single community is able to access our services, and not every community has the same resources. So we really need to take a hard look at our service and make sure that we are truly accessible and able to reach out. The digital divide is so appeared right now. Not everybody has access to the internet. Right now, CPS is providing internet through Chicago Connect to students in CPS. So that's one step towards that, but there are still so many people without internet access. Right now, that people that communicate through both phone and internet. So I really want to make sure that we develop as wide a variety of options so that we don't create barriers to our services. Right now with this pandemic, I think that is the time to really look at that and remove those barriers, both physical barriers, but also this digital divide.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's excellent. Thank you. So, Rossana, tell us a little bit about some of your major goals and what you're hoping to achieve. I think there's going to be some overlap here too.
I think some of the most important things that we have been putting forward have a lot to do with establishing a different idea of what public safety looks like. Mm-hmm. When I was running for office, one of the main conversations that I would have with people would be, what are the things that make you feel safe? I think that for a very long time, we have been deciding as a society that when we talk about public safety, we talk about policing. And we wanted to move away from there. We wanted to move into the realm of what is possible for our lives. So to me, my first term looks like fighting to try to address the needs of the people and what are the things that actually are going to keep us safe. And how do people are kept safe? They are kept safe by providing housing opportunities. We are working on an affordable housing development in my ward. That is a drop in the bucket. Carlos is doing the same thing in the 35th. There's not enough affordable housing. We want to fight for that. Alongside with that, we have been advocating to lift the ban on rent control. For example, we have been advocating to strengthen the ARO ordinance. So housing is an incredibly important part of what we came to do, and I frame it as safety. I have been advocating for a stronger welcoming city ordinance in the city. We were able to pass that, which has been really important for our undocumented brothers and sisters and siblings. We now have a stronger ordinance. We're still fighting to make sure that we get rid of the gang database, which puts our undocumented siblings at risk. One thing that we are pushing forward right now is an attempt to develop a crisis response network in the city of Chicago that would come out of the mental health clinics. So what we're proposing is reopening the mental health clinics, expanding them and attaching mobile units that would have social workers and EMTs responding to mental health emergencies and emergencies that are nonviolent, or that do not require the presence of an armed officer. And we believe that in that way we can provide more holistic services to our neighbors. We can protect people who are at risk, particularly vulnerable people that have mental illness, the homeless, and people who have substance abuse issues. All of these things and all of these instances do not grant the use of an armed officer. It puts people's lives at risk. Armed officers don't necessarily have the training to be able to deal with any of these issues, but this is the tool that we're using, right? So we are hoping that by pushing forward crisis response network for the city that is publicly funded and that uses the resources that we already have in the mental health clinics and expand them, we will both save lives and protect lives. We will provide more holistic services, and at the same time, we will stop wasting money on police lawsuits whenever police ends up interacting with this kind of issue, and we end up with a lawsuit because of police misconduct. At the same time, we know that we're spending over $100 million a year in police overtime, and that has a lot to do with the fact that the police is responding to a lot of incidents that they should not be responding to. So cutting down on the actual things that police should be responding to would definitely help us save money in terms of not having to pay for extra hours, and that money can be put into actually providing the services that the people need. I have also been fighting for Indigenous People Day. So there's a lot of racial equity involved in the work that I have been trying to push forward. We have been advocating for getting rid of white supremacist monuments in the city. So I think that it's a pretty comprehensive set of initiatives that we have been trying to see through.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned the monuments. That was actually one of the topics I wanted to cover specifically. The built world, which is what a lot of our audience tonight is not necessarily responsible for, but we're involved in it to a degree that your other Chicago residents may not be, because we're architects or we're designers. So let's talk a little bit about what the impact of the built world has and what sort of advocacy drives, like the removal of the statues and the monuments, and like the initiatives for modifying housing for folks who need it in, you know, the South and the West Sides, who need the access because they have a disability, because they have limited means. Tell us a little bit more about the built world specifically and what your advocacy is doing in that form. So if either of you want to start with that.
If you want me to.
Yeah, Rachel, please.
Right, so I wanted to respond. at a couple of weeks of the Department of Cultural Affairs Special Event has set up a committee to evaluate our city's monuments and memorial. So I was asked to serve at that committee. So today we had our first meeting to really evaluate that. And I think it's such a good opportunity to look at the monuments in our city, but also to think about the future and who deserves to be remembered and recognized, but also how do we do that and ensure that anything that we add to the city, to the narrative, is accessible. But what I would also like to see is representation of disability, including disability history, disability role models. I think that we could use more representation of that narrative in our city, and it also overlaps with many other categories around us. And after time, we do have leaders with disability, but their disability is removed from their history and from their identity. And I think that we need to look at where we can add that back, because this was a pride, it is a source of how someone navigated the world, is one of their many identities. And so, so we do have, we need to have more housing in the city that is accessible. So one solution that MOPD offers is we have a home modification program that if we have an designated placement architect, so we do have an architect leading this work with the team. And so anyone who has a disability and needs help in making their home accessible, they can contact MOPD's home modification program. So for example, if you are not able to enter your own home, maybe you have still a lift copy add-on so that you can enter your home. Well, if you need a bathroom to be accessible, that's another area where a team of architects, and we have a social worker and an advocate, they will come in and advise at that about those, but how to make that home more accessible. So those are some programs. So now thinking about the built one, that is the disability was not thought about what this world was built here after Chicago was rebuilt. To the 1871 fire, they did not think about disability access then. But you go back that far in history, we do have projects that were emerged after that time. But people with disability have been working to make the world adapt to them, if we could work around a solution. But many times it's still in after that. So we go back afterwards and add solutions. For example, if those solutions end up being more accessible for everyone. So email is one example that was developed as a tool to help that people communicate. Text messaging was developed as a tool to help that people communicate, but not everybody uses it. In fact, people convert. How many mothers out there say their kids will not answer the phone, but they answer a text. But also Club Cause, another example is Club Cause. It was developed as a way for people with physical disabilities to be able to navigate our city, but it also benefits everyone who pushes through the luggage and any other code. So we really need to tweak the design, the accessibility into that design stage, and make sure that it's part of the design at the very beginning, whether you are creating a building or you are developing an app, or even when you're developing a workspace. Because people with disabilities have skills, they have want to work. We even have people with disabilities who work as architects. I know a deaf architect. I also know someone who uses a wheelchair who's an architect. There's many more out there, but to make sure that architects with disabilities are able to contribute, the workspaces need to be accessible. So architecture firms and employers need to make sure that not only do we think about the world that we're building outside of the office, but looking at how do we make the space inside the office where the desires are created accessible. And the Americans with Disabilities Act requires feasible accommodation. So if someone is deaf, it needs to say the English interpreter, or someone uses a wheelchair needs access or elevator, we need to take the time to make sure that the workplace is one that welcomes that contribution in itself, so the people with disabilities don't feel afraid to ask for accommodation, because everyone brings a different perspective, and we value those diverse perspectives in our work. And people with disabilities, just like anyone else, will add different things. So for one example, there's in my own house, I always complain to my peers that our dining room is dark. So at dinner time, I would say it's really dark. I can't breathe very well. So when my peers read in the dining room, they actually add in an extra set of lights. So, but that's what we think. If you go to a dead party, you will always find that people in the kitchen, because that's where the most light is. Mm-hmm. But people really love those things, so it doesn't take much. It's not rocket science, but I would like to see more architecture program incorporate accessibility. In my understanding that there's not very much in the curriculum in architecture programs about what that means. So I see that as a huge opportunity to really, and I see architects as green advocates in making the world more accessible, both in physical access, but also in communication access.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked your comment about earlier how the people who are disabled, anyone can become part of that community at any time in their lives. Mm-hmm. And so it always seemed to me to be strange that the building codes and the regulations that are in place that guide how the built world is built don't seem to take enough of that into account. So like, for example, in affordable housing, I don't recall what the figures are in Chicago, but there's a percentage of units that need to meet the federal guidelines, or if there's local guidelines that are more strict, they need to meet those. But it's just a small percentage. And it never really seemed to make sense to me why you wouldn't make all of the units at least adaptable or prepare for certain things that would need to come along. Like, okay, we're going to have smoke detectors that have an audible alarm, but we're also going to have strobes or wiring for strobes, or, you know, we'll have blocking in the walls in anticipation of the brain is just not working today. So, you know what I'm saying. So do you see, Rachel, that your role would be to ask, or do you think that architects have that kind of business to say to the city government or to the federal level, like, hey, why aren't we including this in the building code? We want to add this kind of thing. Do you see that as one aspect of advocacy that architects could take on? That is a very loaded question.
So people with disabilities are to the first to the advocating, the more people that can advocate for a more accessible world, the better it will be for other of us. So we do have several building codes, standards, the 2010 AD standards, which I will be using to evaluate the city's program access and accessibility, but that there's also the Illinois Accessibility Code and the Chicago Accessibility Code that was passed in 2017. So those provide guidelines, but but there's not enough enforcement of those guidelines. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for architects to take those data to say, we're going to follow these, but we're going to go above and beyond. Nobody will stop architects from doing that, yet you will create more housing because there is a shortage of housing that is not saved, is not reserved for when people need it. I mean, housing is, I've had a few conversations this week. Housing is an area where there's more of it needed, more accessible housing needed. And as I come into this role, I see different proposals. There are different percentages of making housing accessible, and we just need to get more options because I think architects can absolutely lead the way by saying, these are the standards we want to allow as many people as possible to live here and think about their concern regardless of what happens with the population who will simply live there. I think that's a great way for architects to be advocates.
Yeah, absolutely. Rossana, tell us a little bit more about some of your affordable housing initiatives, and if there's a space for architects or even just residents to assist with that and help tell the city and tell the people who are giving the funding for this, this is important, we want this to happen. Ooh. Your mic.
Sorry.
There we go.
Before I talk about this, I just want to say that the father of my child is an architect. So I have a lot of insight into the architecture world.
I'm very excited now.
I would say, yes, there are several different things that we can talk about. When we talk about affordable housing, for example, in many communities, there are populations that are going to resist affordable housing because of the narrative that it brings crime, that it brings property values down. And I think that organizing neighbors and making sure that we're supporting efforts to bring affordable housing is a really important thing. So whenever there is an affordable housing proposed for an area, I think that activism around, yes, we want this here, and yes, we want to provide input because we want that space that is going to be provided at an affordable price to also be a beautiful space, to be a space that provides for a good quality of life for people, right? And also, what are the opportunities for this space to interact with the community that you already have, right? Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, sometimes this becomes a NIMBY argument when then you all of a sudden not in my backyard kind of thing, but it is sort of like under the, I don't know how to say that, under the blanket or something. Like it is not direct, right? Yeah. So people start talking about the design of the building. Like one thing that has happened actually in our community, we're in the middle of a process right now, a community-driven zoning process, which is something that we put in place in our office in order to make sure that there was democracy and transparency in the ways that we are making our decisions in terms of how we develop our neighborhood. And one of the reasons why we did that is because we do believe that if communities organize themselves in order to be able to support the presence of affordable housing, if you have that kind of infrastructure built in your communities, and that's something that we have been doing, if you have a community-driven zoning process, people are going to tell you, yes, we want affordable housing. And then it's not just me making the decision as the alderman with my ultimate power. Yes, I'm going to decide because I have the prerogative to give a zoning change. I'm giving a zoning change because this is what the community wants, right? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, in this particular project, this is our first big affordable housing project that we're going to have in our community. There have been talks at times from neighbors that say, oh, that is horrible. That is like a warehouse for the poor. And when you look at the design, it's actually a really well-designed building. So I think that the ideas of aesthetics and the ideas of space and how design interacts with space and community can be very subjective, but also we can get to a consensus of what works for our communities, right? So I think for communities to come together to participate in the process of designs, for communities to be welcoming of affordable housing projects, for communities to contact their aldermen and let them know, I want this community to be welcoming to affordable housing. All of those things are going to be really important. To push for our aldermen and our elected officials to have processes that are democratic, right? To push our elected officials, okay, you have aldermanic prerogative, that's true. You get the ultimate decision, but how about you start a process where we can also chime in, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, because you are your residents' representative.
Exactly. So you should also always provide space for input, so that your decisions are not solely based on what your perceptions are, but it's a community process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are some of the things that we have been navigating lately. So I wanted to share.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So,
But to add something to that, at MOPD, we do have an accessibility compliance unit where we review the pre-permits and provide feedback on accessibility before the permits are approved. We will ask for changes to be made for accessibility. I think the part of the challenge is that once the space gets built, there's no enforcement and making sure that it matches with the accessibility that's set out in the blueprints. So I think that's an opportunity there. And I also wanted to put in a plug, so we will be hiring for and contact at that team. The job posting will be posted in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. So I'm looking for in contact who wants to work on this accessibility piece. And so I will send you the posted courses available for you to circulate and mark out the format, but that's a great way to be able to use your skills, and especially if this conversation is within you enjoying.
Oh, I look forward to it. So everyone who's in the audience here, pay attention. If you're looking for something, we'll be posting that on the CWA website after this video. Excellent, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the big issue that is on everyone's mind right now, the pandemic, and what kinds of things that you've been sort of not forced into, but had to adapt to in new ways, and what kinds of things you're dealing with that you would never dreamed of happening prior to the pandemic. I know one of the initiatives that I remember seeing from an email from the city was all of the restaurants that have outdoor seating are looking for ideas for what to do in winter, because this is Chicago, it gets cold. How do we use the space, and how do we use the ideas from the community to help these businesses that before the pandemic, this wouldn't have been any kind of issue. So tell us a little bit about what the pandemic itself has had as I mean, that's a huge question, has had on what your role has been, and a little bit about what you've done to adapt. Rossana, do you want to start? Sure,
I can take that one. I think there's a lot of things. One of them is we, as I said before, we have been very committed to making sure that our undocumented neighbors have resources. And one of the things that happened during this pandemic is that many of our undocumented neighbors lost their jobs and couldn't provide for their families. All of a sudden, you can't pay rent. I supported the creation of several mutual aid networks in our communities that have been doing lots of different things. At the beginning, there was fundraising done, and we created a fund where people could just apply and get like a $200 cash assistance, no questions asked, because it seemed like the means tested kind of help was not going to be able to reach everybody. So we decided that was the way to go. After that, we started creating pantries. We started creating food distribution networks so that people that had disabilities, people who could not come out because they were very vulnerable, we could do groceries. We could pick up groceries and take them to their houses. We started doing a lot of check-in calls with our elderly neighbors, and people would phone bank for this. So I think one of the things that happened right after the pandemic was the absolute understanding that people were on their own, that there was not a lot of government coming in to help people, particularly the most vulnerable. So I think organizing around the community to make sure that we had each other's backs and that we could survive through solidarity was a really important part. Then there was the uptick in violence, right? Because all of a sudden people are inside. For a while things were quiet, but then we have seen an uptick in shootings as people lose their jobs, as we're going to see a lot of more criminal activity. So we had a whole plan that was about space activation for the summer, where we were going to take over public spaces and we were going to activate them in order to prevent violent incidents. All of a sudden everybody's inside. So the whole project that we wanted to roll out became mute because nobody could be outside. So we have been trying to adapt to that. We have been trying to figure out ways in which we can social distance and still do distributions outside with drive-throughs. We've been organizing testing clinics around the neighborhood. So that definitely there has been a shift in the ways in which we were planning to do things, but we had definitely been adapting. It has been really hard, but I am very glad to see the amount of solidarity that has come from our community during this time.
Thank you. Rachel, what can you tell us about how the pandemic has impacted you and how it's impacted your role and what's changed?
So first I want to talk about wearing masks. So as a person, when I communicated with someone, I look at a face and I watch a facial expression and I view the lips, and masks have become like my kryptonite for communication, because now all of that is caught up. So I wear the masks, but it means that how I communicate completely changes. So I have to figure out other options. So but also it means then that ability to read each other's facial expressions is changed. So there are some clear masks that I'm trying to get to make more readable, but they're not widely readable. There are some with the cutout about the mouth, and there's some clearable. So those go dark and how big, but it means that I've had to learn how to, as a person, I've had to learn how to navigate the world differently than ever before. And I rely so much on people's facial expressions and their body language, but when I can't see what they're saying, at first I felt very cut up, because at the beginning of the pandemic, when I was sure to get home, I would go walk my dog. And that was the only time they never see anybody else. And you make small talk, you're about your dog, how old is he, what's his name? I couldn't even do that. And ever the neighbors stopped talking to each other because there was also, we also better maintain that 6 feet distance. So it's been an ongoing way of adapting. And I'm also learning that this does have an effect on the educators are thinking about how to interact with students, because we do learn a lot from watching each other's facial expression. So for me, I used to put apps on my phone where I type what I'm saying. If I go somewhere to order something, I use speech-to-text apps to help fill those gaps, because we all need to be safe, and we are masks for, to protect us and other people. So but this pandemic also gives us, the pandemic is devastating from a public health standpoint, and I don't want to minimize that in any way. I mean, it is devastating, and it's going to be around for some time. But it also gives us an opportunity to look at how we provide service and to ask why do we do this way? For example, before March, we providing every person education services. People had to either come to City Hall or to one of my departments or the location, we have a location at the west side. But now people are much more open to providing services virtually, and that has huge benefits. And so for me as a deaf person, I love these virtual platforms because I don't have to worry about the masks and everybody can be seen. And another bonus is that sight language interpreters are working virtually, so they're much more available and accessible because they're not thinking about, they don't have to think about travel time between jobs or fatigue, being outside. So right now it is much easier for me to get that communication access, but it's also people with disabilities who have transportation barriers are able to access places much easier because it provides more of a level platform. We still have to modify it a little bit with added capacity or any other accessibility. So I want to incorporate them. That is the part of my vision, is to incorporate that accessibility long-term beyond the pandemic. And I had a conversation with my staff about this yesterday. We want to think about solutions now, but we want to also be prepared that to implement these solutions after COVID-19 is hopefully a distant memory, and really be have the foresight to think that beyond that, what's coming, how do we be prepared, not only for this point, but for the next point, and all of those changes will make our city services more accessible, and also make them maintain them, keep them safe. We better be value people's safety in health, and so we can continue to do that while effectively providing our services. And so that's what I'm working on right now. And I think that conversation can happen much more quickly than it would have otherwise, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely changed what the barriers are and changed perception of the barriers for sure. Excellent, thank you. So we're nearly out of time, and I'm really sad that we're nearly out of time because I would love to talk with you both for the rest of the evening. So I'm gonna leave the formal questions I sent you aside because I want to make sure that any questions from the audience we also get a chance to hear. Catherine Anthony is in the audience. I'm reading her question here. Since our panelists are fairly new on the job, what would you like to be able to point to this time next year or in the next couple of years as your greatest accomplishment? So Rossana, would you like to start with that?
I would definitely love to have a crisis response and care network that takes care of the people of Chicago without using police to address mental health emergencies and nonviolent incidents.
Excellent. Thank you. And Rachel, how would you respond? What would be your greatest accomplishment in the next couple of years?
So I would like to make sure that other services not only provide physical access, but also communication access. It really go to the next level or two in those status. And I'm working at that now to help us get there.
Excellent. Thank you. That is it for our evening. I want to thank you again, both of you, for joining us tonight and spending your time. I know that you didn't have to travel anywhere, but your time is still valuable and we appreciate it. So thank you all in the audience for joining us this evening and being a part of the CWA event tonight. And we will be posting a recording of this video, and I'm hoping we're going to get captioning for it. More on that soon. And that will be posted on the CWA website as well. So thank you both. And thank you, Kate, for your interpreting. We're very happy that you were able to join us as well.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.